Korea has been witnessing a growing group of young, avid art collectors who are breathing fresh life into the local art scene and beyond. So what is the appeal of art among the young enthusiasts? And is Korea the region's next major art market? How do experts explain Korea's growing presence in the global art scene? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we shed light on Korea's contemporary works of art and their growing appeal to young collectors as observed by a French expert. I have Mael Bellec, curator of Korean collections at the Cernuschi Museum over in Paris. It's a pleasure to have you here, Mr. Bellec.
Nice to meet you.
Right, Mr. Bellec, perhaps we could start with a few words on your work and a bit about yourself as well, please.
So I'm a curator in the Cernuschi Museum, which is a museum dedicated to Asian arts and which belongs to the city of Paris. There I'm handling the Korean collection, which is mainly composed of modern and contemporary artworks. And my work is, well, it's very different depending on what day, on what projects I am working on, but mainly it's trying to monitor the well-being of the collection, trying to get new works into the collection and setting up projects, exhibition, so that we can show to our audience what Korean art is like.
Right, and speaking about the audience, Mr. Bellec, what has been the overall response to Korean artworks there at your museum?
It's been good, actually, but you know, you never know if it's good because you have selected the right works of art, or if it's good because whatever you show, it would be good. So we did a few shows along the years, and every time the response was quite good. The first show we did was on Korean artists in France, because there's a very interesting history of Korean artists in France, and France was a very important country for Korean artists at one point. And the response was quite good because the French audience, it's a history which is well known in Korea, but the French audience discovered this history at that time because they didn't know that people like Kim Won-ki, Nam Kwan, and other artists Kim Chong-yeol they knew because he was very famous. But we had a lot of very famous artists who were in France, and some of them are almost unknown to a French audience. So this was kind of a discovery. And there was also an exhibition on Young-no. And Young-no was a different case because Young-no was known in France and he had a lot of pupils. He had founded a kind of academy where he taught ink painting, and he had hundreds of students along the years. So there was a memory there, and there were people who came to the exhibition as a kind, as pilgrims visiting their masters, in fact. And so there was a kind of more emotional response, and also a discovery of the extent of Young-no's work, because they knew him mainly as a teacher and they discovered he was also a contemporary artist. So this time it was different. And when we did the show on Bong Yeja, which is the last show we did in the museum, it was different too, because Bong Yeja had, because she died a few weeks ago, she had a very large audience in France, both art lovers and people who were seeking a kind of spirituality in her works. And so there were these two audiences went to see the show, and the response was different. So every time the response is different, but every time it was good, actually, which shows that there's something in Korean art which can appeal to a French audience.
Right, and talking about Korean art, Mr. Bellec, a renowned platform for contemporary art, Frieze, recently held its inaugural Asian fair here in the capital city, Seoul. Now, pundits say this is proof that Korea is growing in appeal to the international audience and that it may become the region's next major art market. What do you say?
I'm not sure if it's proof. I would think it's consequence, in fact, because the Korean art market is I'm not a specialist of markets. You know, I'm working in a public institution, and when I deal with money, it's a headache for me. But my feeling is that the Korean art market was already booming, and that if frieze came to Seoul, it was because the Korean market was already growing. And so that's it. It's more for me a consequence than a proof of anything, because you didn't need that to know that the Korean market fared very well this last year.
Right, of course, a valid point. Mr. Bellec, how do you then explain Korea's growing presence, if I may, in the global art market?
Well, there are which are for me good reasons, and some other reasons which I'm less interested in. Let's start with the reasons I'm less interested in.
All right.
There are a lot of money in Korea. There is a support of Korean collectors for Korean art. So Korean art can be sold at a high price. So the economics are there for the Korean art market to grow. And there are other things which I'm more interested in. It is that for me, a part of the Korean art market is something which fits the needs of a Western audience, of a Korean audience, but also of a Western audience. Because all these things that the Korean artists did in the 60s and 70s, what is called now dansekwa, they were artists who were working with materials, often natural materials. They were abstract work artists. So a lot of them had a kind of spirituality imbued in their works. And I think that's something that the Western audience is looking for today, to have a closer relationship to nature, to have more spirituality. And that's something that they find in some Korean artworks. But that doesn't mean that every Korean artworks has a market in Western countries. There are things which are not exhibited, there are things which are not sold there, but the market is growing because there is a trend of Korean art which has become very famous and highly sought for in Western countries.
Right, and talking about trends, Mr. Bellec, Korea itself has been witnessing a growing group of MZ generation people. These are the people in their below 40 or early 40s. In fact, quite a number of them are avid art collectors. Is this a growing global trend, or is this only visible here in South Korea? And if that is the case, what are the implications of this trend?
Well, this is the part where I'm not really, I don't have the knowledge to answer this question, because as I've told you, I'm not working on the market. I'm working with collectors when they are willing to separate themselves from their collection, you know. And most of the time, they are quite old when it happens. So I'm mostly working with older people. And of course, there are some younger collectors that I meet in art galleries, but I wouldn't be able to tell you if there are more and more young collectors and if it's something which is specific to the Korean art market. I don't have the knowledge to answer that.
Right, well, thank you for your honesty. Mr. Bellec, then, are there any defining traits, perhaps, of Korean artwork that have universal appeal?
There are different trends of Korean art, and not all of them can be as easily exported than the others. Of course, all these dansekwa paintings is very easy to show in a Western country, because it's easy to understand. You know, it's abstract art. So you just have to look at it and let yourself get immersed in the painting. And but there are also other trends. In my museum, it's an Asian art museum, so we are very interested in ink painting. And of course, we are interested in people like Kim Ki-chong, Woljun Chung-woo-song, Lee Young-no, Lee Sang-bom, all these people who are not doing big figures on the art market today, and who are not well known in the West, but who are of interest to people who are working on Asian arts. But it's a smaller field. And you have all the artists working on things which are more figurative, which are more deeply rooted in a social commentary of what Korea is. And these kind of things is more difficult to show outside Korea because people don't have the keys to understand this.
Right, of course. Mr. Bellec, do bear with me, but I ask this next question as a lay person, very curious lay person, of course. What factors would you consider before adding an artwork to a private collection?
Oh, this one. To a private collection. I was about to answer about the public collection I'm working in. A private collection, the answer is quite easy, in fact. You just have to like the work. I mean, if you collect it, you will live with it. So the best criterion is whether you like it or not, and whether you think you will still like it in 2, 3, 10 years. I don't really believe in art as an investment, but that's not my job, as I've told you. So for me, the main question is, what do you derive from looking at the work of art? And if you think it can be interesting for years, yeah, go.
Now let's make this difficult. What would you consider if you're adding this artwork to a public collection?
Alors, to a public collection, it depends on which collection. So I will talk only about our collection in the Cernuschi Museum. We are interested a lot in the, as I've told you, in the history of Korean artists in France, because we think it's an important history. And I have a feeling that we need to work more on this history, because if you take a look at the first half of the 20th century, you know, you have all these foreign painters in France, Picasso, Chagall, Soutine, and they have become part of French art history. And when you take a look at the second half of the 20th century, you had people like Kim Wan-ki, you had people like Lee Song-ja, Nam Gwan, Lee Eun-no, Bang Ye-ja, Moon Shin, Han Mook. And all these people are considered to be foreigners. But they were there, and they were part of the French art scene. So we still need to work a lot on them so that they, at the end, they become part of our history too. So this is something that I'm working a lot on. So if it's a Korean painter who played a significant role on the Parisian art scene, that would interest me. The other thing would be ink painting. We have a very huge collection of Lee Eun-no's paintings. We have the biggest collection outside of Korea, in fact. We have 130 works of Lee Eun-no in the collection. So we have some oil paintings, but mainly ink paintings. And this is of interest to us because we are a museum working on both ancient and contemporary art. So when we show a contemporary artwork that we can link with tradition, that we can link with history, it always makes sense for our audience. And the last thing would be trying to collect things which mean something when it comes to the Korean art field, either because they symbolize something or because they were, at one point, they were meaningful. You know, things, for example, the last thing we had entering the collection were paintings by Baek Hyung-soo. Baek Hyung-soo is an artist who is not the most famous one in Korea. He doesn't really have a market overseas, but he spent a lot of time in France, and his style, which was a figurative, kind of naive, figurative style, is something that for me is, it embodies a trend of Korean art that we didn't have in the collection. So we'll be able to show to our audience that Korean art is more diverse than they thought. So that's kind of the things that we try to look at when we collect Korean art.
I see, and Korean art seems to be bringing France and Korea together as well.
I hope so.
Right. Mr. Bellec, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thanks.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching.